All right. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. It's been a minute since we saw you last. Welcome to Real World Lessons in Designing New Products with Derek and Johanna are here tonight. We are the Denver UX newbies. I'm sure you already knew that, but just wanted to remind you of that. And Chelsea, Ryan, and I are your organizers for this group. And we also organize the Denver UX group. We're co-organizing that group as well now. And we have an event coming up for them for Denver UX. It's called Crafting Product Vision Stories with Hannah Deering. She'll be doing some storytelling exercises and talk with us. And that's coming up in about 2 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. I think it's actually on Meetup now. So please go sign up for that. Our May event is also coming up, and this one is going to be an interesting panel about adjacent career paths for UX grads. So we know that the UX space is a little difficult to get into right now. It seems to be picking up, but there's also some other career paths out there that are really interesting that we might be interested in. So we wanted to bring in some people, a data scientist, a product owner, a product manager, and a developer to kind of hear about their career path and how they got into these careers. So without further ado, we have Derek and Johanna here tonight, and I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about themselves and what they're going to talk about tonight. And I'll stop sharing. There you go.
Need to share. Hold on. All right. Hi, everyone. So as Lene mentioned, I'm Derek Sakamoto. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Snappy Health, and we'll talk about what Snappy Health does in a minute, but this is like my 4th time doing an early stage startup, and when Lene and Ryan and Chelsea posted like topics, I proposed doing topic on developing new products, because I found that a lot of times when I was working with a UX designer or learned that I needed to work with a UX designer, the processes they were coming into didn't really fit the constraints of a startup. So that's kind of the topic of this topic. And then Johanna, why don't you go introduce yourself?
Hey guys, I am the UX designer at Snappy Health. I graduated from the Flatiron School's UX program, and 8 months later, landed a job with Snappy Health as their first designer. And Derek and I actually met on Denver UX. So really excited to be here and explain a little bit about what I've learned in school versus what it's really like to work at a startup as a UX designer.
Cool. So we're going to just go into a quick about us that gives you context, business context for all the things we're working on. And then Johanna's really going to take over and teach the real meat of this lecture, which is the real world lessons. And then we'll summarize it all up with some key takeaways. So about us. So Snappy Health, what we do is we make it easy for independent physicians to manage quality data that's required by Medicare Advantage for reimbursement. That's a lot of words, but really, like, we take a highly engineered form that is meant from a lot of different practices, and then we put it in an interface that patients can access through a seamless experience, and then give us their quality data. They would be filling out this form already, but we then measure it for the office to manage and make sure that they're getting all the right data. The context is, you may have heard of something called value-based care. It's existed for over 30 years, but in the last 3 years, the reimbursement has actually been high enough to pay attention. Also, COVID-19 has really shifted the strategy for a lot of primary care groups to go from being based on fee-for-service revenue to value-based risk revenue. And our problem statement is, would primary care groups, or would providing primary care groups an easy way to get insights into their Medicare Advantage health data, the quality data, make an undeniably high ROI for these people to switch to value-based care overall. So, as far as like the stages of development and where we're at, it's, our first challenge was just seeing if this would work. And it did. And so we have patients engaged with our software. We have a 70% open rate by the way we've crafted our messages. We have a 60% completion HRA completion rate, which means that a patient is coming in with a 20-minute survey before their actual appointment. So it means they spend more time with their provider and more focused on their actual healthcare complaints. And then last is we actually achieved compliance levels in short pilots. What we've really then spent our time working on now is really how do we, target a beachhead customer for our product, and it's really private equity backed primary care roll-ups where they're really looking to increase revenue and realize that, and they have the management and leadership. Sorry, my dog is squeaking her squirrel, but they have the management and leadership to actually make the changes and realize that this is a really good idea for their business. And then the last challenge will be, how are we scaling our operations, not only into new markets, but also into new verticals and new payers. So there's a lot of interesting things going on behind the scenes, but we are really in the trenches of healthcare. And I don't think there's a better way to explain that. But if for everything that Johanna is going to talk about, the real context is, we provide this interactive form that really helps the payers, the providers, and the office staff know where they're at in terms of getting this data from the patients, so that they can be reimbursed appropriately and show that they are managing a patient. And then a quick timeline. We've only been around for about a year. So we incorporated in March, hired our initial engineers in June, contracted a senior UX designer. When she took another job, we hired Johanna. And then really the key for working with Johanna was realizing that, well, the processes that we were using and the way we were using a UX designer, we could get so much more if we changed them a little bit. And really what Johanna's covering are not only ways that we've improved and the experience for Johanna, but also we've gotten more value out of Johanna than just being just the UX designer. We've used her design skills in so many other ways that have helped us in commercializing our product. So Johanna, go for it.
Great. Okay, thanks, Derek. So now I'm just going to walk through some real world lessons that I've learned after graduating Flatiron. I learned a couple of things. And now being in a startup, I'm going to share a little bit about what we do and how it differs from the things that you typically learn in school. Go to the next slide. So the first lesson that I've learned is that the design process isn't only for designers. Go to the next one. So typically what we learn in school is that designers do design and engineers do engineering. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the design thinking process. And also we're taught that, the design process is collaborative to an extent. You have stakeholders, users, product managers. But from my particular experience, I never really understood the gravity of how engineers were involved in the design process. And in school, I learned that essentially engineers had their own process. It was very separate to the design process. Go to the next one. Oop. And so, yeah, so in a startup, typically the designers and engineers are really working to solve the same problem. We're working on developing features to find product market fit. And the whole development team is really responsible for making the design decisions. And having this really close collaboration not only helps us align design goals and technical goals, but also helps improve our team efficiency. So understanding that we're all working towards the same goal. We're trying to deliver a product that is both delightful and functional at the exact same time. Go to the next one. And so at Snappy Health, we actually use a process called the shape up method. So we start with shaping. Derek, the head of engineering, and I meet up weekly to explore different problem spaces together. We then move on to bedding, where we choose a specific problem space. Typically, we're choosing these based on technical effort and also priority, as well as also observations from research and things that we hear from our current clients. And then we go on to building, where we actually share the problem space with the whole entire engineering team, where we itemize deliverables for technical must-haves and also bringing forward some design concepts. It's really beneficial to have something like this simply because we don't know what we're building at the beginning. And typically from the other diagram that we showed before, design essentially leads engineering. And in the shape up method, we're really working together as a collaborative team. The second lesson that I've learned is that design does not always come first. Typically, what we learn in school is that our prototypes and wireframes are essentially blueprints for the engineers to follow. However, in a startup, that is not necessarily the case. To give an example, one of the first things that I did when joining Snappy Health was conducting a UX audit. So here is an example of an existing design of the patient profile, where essentially a user would have to click into a form in order to see the patient reported answers. I put forth a proposed design change to actually merge those two together. I thought it'd make more sense to have the data more accessible and also to reduce the redundancy of seeing some of the same information on the second screen. However, after the shape up process, we learned that our backend actually stores data very differently. And so it was a bigger lift than we had expected. In addition, there were other business requirements and other bet boards that we wanted to tackle first that were higher in priority. And so during that time, as the engineering team started to build out a new way of storing data, one of the things that I did was start to think about how do we get to this vision? It was a design that I proposed in the beginning, but going from our current design to the future design, it couldn't just happen so immediately. And so creating kind of iterations to start making room and real estate for this new design was something that I did, and it was working backwards from the vision. And last but not least, I think this is a very important one as well. I've learned that research is not always feasible. So typically what we learn in school is that designers receive a brief. Most of the time, the briefs are properly scoped out, the target audience is defined, and there is research objectives for the project. We also assume that we have 2 weeks of research to plan and conduct interviews and all of that. And that is not necessarily the case. For Snappy Health, we've definitely building products in a startup environment means that we're constantly iterating. Requirements are changing. We are still trying to figure out who our target audience was and finding our market fit. We're still always working on evolving our development process and learning how to integrate research into our development process. And also time constraints is another reason why it's not feasible. Some business requirements are really high in priority that we need to get done, and some things we don't necessarily need to be researching. So when we're kind of thinking about the different mindsets between a startup and an established company, the startup mindset is really about finding product market fit and increasing funding. I'd like to highlight too, it's really about function over form, whereas an established mindset is more about adding nice to haves, improving customer satisfaction. And so then form is then prioritized over function. Other things such as limited resources to allocate to research and larger budgets from an established company are a couple other differentiators between the two. So to sum it up, some design key takeaways is that the design process is a super collaborative process, especially in a startup environment. Solving problems as a team helps improve efficiency as well as a full understanding of the product. Secondly, it's important to advocate for UX changes. So even though design doesn't always come first, it's important to know when to choose your battles, as well as also understanding the technical limitations and business goals associated with that UX change. And so for the example that I gave before, it was important that I know how the back end worked before I pushed for that UX change. And lastly, research is really a tool to drive design, but is not always necessary or feasible. There are so many different types of research, such as SME interviews or meta-analysis, looking at data that already exists out there. And those are still considered research. And when in doubt, if it's not feasible for the company or you have time constraints, using best practices and trusting your intuition and observations is something that you can also use as a tool.
So to bring this back to more big picture and like where we are, I don't think any newbie or anyone learns in school is necessarily wasted. But it's really, we have so many constraints that it's really hard. And one thing, like, we found that design can be a blocker if it's not managed correctly. And this is, what shifted to Johanna's second point, where we said, Johanna, why don't you work on the future vision, and the engineering can help figure out, maybe what's their first iteration, and then Johanna iterated from there. The second one was UX and engineering, just really, I'm technically the product manager as the CTO right now, but we don't really have one. But they work closely together, and frankly, it's gone really well. And but we look for that in our hiring too. The other thing, though, that I found surprising for our company is Johanna's used her UX design skills and principles to really help with a lot of other tasks in the company, like, helping, realign the product vision and realign our efforts and really help us prioritize some bigger picture goals that we have. I mean, we're a very ambitious company. We think that we're going to really change healthcare by aligning these economic incentives based on quality and value-based care. And it really, the design principles and design research skills that Johanna learned in school have applied to so many other things that have been important to our business. And last is, like, for us right now, is the right critical is hire. Right hire is critical. A lot of while I've known that and learned the hard way through a number of other ventures that hiring a UX designer earlier than most people think was a good idea, I didn't know how to work with one, and Johanna kind of taught us how. So, we've learned this through experience. I think as we grow, we're going to see our current practices evolve to something that's going to be more like best practice. And, the other key thing is that, really separating the UX and UI responsibilities within our company. And then last is, when we're established, which is not even on our radar yet. But, I figured then you're going back to everything you learn at school because it's been taught for so long. So, and yeah, I mean, I think that's really it. If you'd like to learn more about Snappy Health, we have a website, a LinkedIn. It doesn't say much. You can also reach out to us. We'll be sure to, our emails are just our name at snappyhealth.com. But, you can find us, and then I will turn it over to Ryan for a Q&A.
Yeah, thanks guys. This is super cool. I've been working at a startup that's a little bit older than I think Snappy Health for a while, and it's totally a different world. So hearing about that early stage startup experience is super interesting. We've got a lot of questions. People are very curious. The first one is for Johanna, but I think it's for both of you. Can you give some examples of UX battles other than the one that you gave about the patient form, whether you were giving up on them or choosing that they were the ones to fight?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Derek.
Johanna, why don't you go first, and then I'll see if what I was thinking fills in.
Okay. The first thing that kind of comes to mind is I did want to do more user testing on our current product. However, we do deal with extremely sensitive data. So mocking that data and putting in false information, our database has really secure data that, we can't be showing people to test with. And so for me, that was a big UX battle in terms of, how do I test our product and understand its usability without, showing things that I shouldn't be showing. And that's something that we're still continuously learning on how to solve, whether that's creating a prototype, mocking up what the actual product looks like, and, just doing a fake version of it. But yeah, that's just one thing that kind of comes to mind in terms of UX challenges that I particularly faced.
I think overall too, what I noticed is that, we're like, as I mentioned, we're in the trenches of healthcare. And so, my co-founder and I have a lot of, ingrained industry knowledge, and trying to get our team up to speed with everything all the time was a challenge. And then as Johanna was coming into the new job, she was excited and learning all these new things while trying to do all the designs and and then it just kind of became a blocker for engineering, because it's like, we can't make this many changes as you're learning these things. And so instead we said, Johanna, why don't you make like what you ultimately want to see? And then, coming back and forth. And really, in addition to the shape up process, there was also a process put in place for me where I am now only really like supposed to tell the rest of my team, which is Johanna and all our engineers, like what our problems are. And then they come back to me with solutions. And so that's really helped refine my thinking as well, because so often we talk about problems and solutions at the same time. It's like, oh, if we just change this thing, then, it'd fix this. And it really makes the process a lot less creative, as collaborative, as well as it detracts from the communication you're trying to say, which is our users are having this problem with this thing. And a solution, you may propose a solution, but that goes into a whole separate conversation later on.
Yeah, it is so refreshing to hear a CTO talking in that way. It's so often that we as UX designers get solutions, and sometimes not even the problem, right? You say we get the solution and the problem. Sometimes it's just a solution. And I think there's not much that's more, I don't know, frustrating or tiring than to have that. So I love that. I've got a follow-up question that's kind of related to what you were talking about, Joanna, with the research. Just diving in deeper. In those situations where your development team is deciphering how much new user research to do versus relying on existing knowledge or data, what factors would force a stronger pull towards new user research rather than tapping the minds of subject matter experts or established research results?
I think, having our CTO and other co-founder be in the industry, understanding specific workflows that we're building a product for, there's a reason why the product was built. And so I think the knowledge that we do have about the industry is very strong. However, we have onboarded new clients and are constantly getting feedback about our product. And so we're kind of using a mix of both, which is, gathering insights from clients and current users, as well as, understanding the knowledge that we have about workflows in the office. And so I wouldn't say that I pull towards one or the other. I think having a mix of it is important. Although I do think, there are certain concepts within our product that are new in general. People have never seen them. And so having feedback from new users is extremely important, especially as we're building a product that doesn't currently exist.
I just have one thing to add, Ryan, if that's okay.
Please.
I think one of the most brilliant things that Johanna said throughout her whole time working at Snappy Health is about the healthcare industry as a whole, which is that, and I don't know if people are looking at one industry versus the other, but healthcare is notorious for having subject matter experts. And Johanna, at the end of all of basically getting accustomed to everything and learning the ins and outs of all this quality data, realized, oh, all these people, they're not really experts at this thing. They're just normal people. What we enable is, an MA where they take, it's just a normal person that takes a class and then they're kind of just told what to do, and, for their job. And that's about it. And they learn everything on the job. So really, one thing is we've focused on really empowering both the patient and the MA, who are just normal people in healthcare. And that's where a lot of our user research has gone as well too. Does this make sense to a normal person that doesn't know all the jargon of healthcare?
I love that insight. I feel like we, especially when you're designing at enterprise, whatever that really means, but specialized stuff, we feel like it has to be complicated and we can just kind of put aside the UX aspect of it. At least I get that a lot in enterprise, but remembering that they're just normal people and that could have been you getting that job is a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
So this is for Johanna. I've heard that joining a startup or a design team of one as a new UX designer can be challenging. And some people even recommend joining an established team for your first job. So having jumped in as a newer UX designer at a startup, what advice do you have for new designers that are trying to decide what the right space is for them?
My advice would be, I guess in a more developed organization, there are already existing processes that designers go through. And so actually being fresh out of school and being a part of a startup who's still figuring out the process has been such a great experience. I know one thing when I was looking for jobs as well that I said was high on my list is I really want a design mentor. And, I didn't know really what that meant. I didn't know if that meant I want a senior designer on my team or in the same company as me. But what I've learned being the only designer at a startup is that, mentorship can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be in your workplace. I think if you're looking for mentorship within your company for design, like maybe an established company may be a better fit. But I think, leadership and mentorship can be found through networks like Denver UX as well. Just any type of organization where there are designers you can learn from. I still keep in touch with some of my Flatiron cohort mates, and we learn from each other all the time. And so I think if you're looking to kind of dive head in and also find your own design process too, working at a startup is a really great experience in terms of being able to figure out your own process as well as, helping the company find their process too.
Thank you. So given what you know now about the reality of UX work, Joanna, what advice would you give to those people that are both considering where they want to go, but also they want to do things to sharpen skills, like maybe post boot camp, but pre-hire? Is there anything we can do that's not daily UI challenges?
Yeah. So one thing that I actually did, and it was a really great experience, I was actually looking for a job during COVID when COVID first started. And I honestly didn't think I was going to get a job during COVID. I was like, I'm just going to wait it out. But in the meantime, I found clients, I found people that, were either willing. I worked under I think it was like a stock contract. So it wasn't actually, I didn't get paid for it, but it was equity based. I found a client through that. Did a little bit of UX with them, learned about their process, also learned new tools too. So I used Jira while I was on that team. We don't currently use Jira, but I thought it was a really cool experience to be able to learn different tools and different processes through working with freelance clients. There's a great site called Catchafire, which is, I believe it's like a creative hub to find volunteer work. I did a bit of UX work with a couple of companies there. And so I really think there are so many opportunities out there, especially now that we have the internet and, people are really looking towards UX designers for either consultant work or even just small UX projects. I think adding those to your resume, especially with companies that exist, that are real, is super important, especially if you're trying to stand out and also, have the experience of collaborating with the team. It's another way.
If I could mention one thing too, is that, Johanna, she never applied for a job. We knew that we knew that our senior our contracted UX designer was leaving, and I was actively looking, and I didn't even post a job description, but Johanna just wrote a really compelling intro on your intros channel, and it was like, this is the person we need in our company. Because a big thing for me was making sure that I had a UX designer that was, and you can hear it in the way Johanna describes how she does things. It's who was curious and ambitious, and also just had so many other leadership qualities early on that that stood out to us, because it was then, okay, this person can work with us and as we figure out these problems.
I'm so glad you mentioned that hiring experience. For one thing, that's awesome to hear that can lead to a job. I know that getting that first contact can be really hard for a lot of us in the group. So that's awesome. I'm curious though, you mentioned that you had a contract UX designer before you hired Johanna. And this is something that I think is pretty unclear to those of us that are on the UX design side looking for jobs or listening to recruiters. Can you help us understand why you would choose to go the contract route versus choosing to go the full-time route for a UX designer?
Oh, we were just in a hurry, and we knew someone was available, and she was between gigs, and she was doing logo design too, and she actually did our logo for us. So that turned out well. We're all very happy with the logo. So, basically she she did a lot of things that I thought were what we needed from like a UX designer, where she did a bunch of wireframes and stuff and really just kind of cleaned up our director of engineering's like mock-ups. Because, you know, engineers can go into like Sketch or Figma too and, you know, mock things up. But like and so that's what he did. And she cleaned that up and helped us think through a couple things. And we really wanted someone to be what I told in describing the contract, kind of like bumper lanes. Like it was like it was like the inflatable bumper tubes so that we could still hit pins. But then, you know, we also realized that it was a learning experience for us, because we realized that that was just not, she wasn't as responsive as we were hoping at times. And so we were like, well, if we move some numbers around, maybe we can hire someone slightly newer that has the right personality, and we rely less on them for the actual wireframes and stuff and rely on them more for the research and just overall UX design. And that's kind of the route we went to.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a lot of it is just ignorance of entrepreneurs. And I mean, I think this talk could be applicable to another talk. And I posted it in like Colorado startups or whatever it's called. But yeah.
So am I hearing right that moving forward at your next startup in 10 years, you would probably go the full-time route? Well, it sounds like you would just keep Johanna and not let her get away. But if you had to hire another designer, what path?
Yeah, I mean, in 10 years for the next one, I mean, we'll see how worn out I am, and hopefully I'm in a different role. But like, the thing is, I would say, yeah, I mean, in lieu of keeping Johanna, it's I would definitely go the full-time route. I would still, you know, me and my team, my engineers are very, very senior. So like, they all, you know, have built things tons of times, and we were like, we knew pretty specifically what we wanted to get and where the gaps were. And it wasn't in wireframes. It was in like, okay, we need someone to really think through this user flow. Does it actually make sense? Are we like building the right things? And like, and the first thing Johanna did was like, can I do a design audit to like make sure this makes sense to me? And we were like, yes. And it was just a match made in heaven. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good transition. We've got one more question. There's a few more that maybe we can cover in our networking breakout sessions, but with regard to that UX audit, did you complete it with a specific focus on a certain area of the product, or was it a broad UX audit? Maybe just tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah. So the first thing, I actually, I think it was a presentation that I did for one of the rounds of the interviews that I had with the team. But I essentially looked at the patient experience as well as also the clinical app. And so it was essentially based on, I'm trying to think back onto when the audit was. It was basically like a overall UX audit. So just understanding the tasks that users could do within both the clinical app and also the flow that patients would go through to fill out this form. I was looking at it from the frame of, okay, like, do I know where to go to complete these things? I basically just use best practices to conduct the audit. But now I'm actually doing another audit very soon on the current product. Kind of, I did that about 6 months ago. And so just kind of checking back in, like, did we fix these things that I highlighted on the first audit? And how can we move from there? I think it's basically like a overall UX audit.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been awesome. We've got a few more questions, but I think that probably the best way to tackle that, since we've got such a small group, is let's jump into our breakout networking rooms. So for anybody that's new to this, what we typically do at the end of one of these sessions is if you need to go ahead and just log off the Zoom. We're just going to be hanging out. But we're going to break out into smaller groups where we get to meet each other. I think Derek and Johanna are going to hang around for a little bit so you can ask some more questions. And we'll do these for about 5 or so minutes each, and we'll keep regrouping. So here we go. You should be thrown into a room. If you're not, let me know.